So, when it comes to living with dyspraxia, which is the primary focus of this channel, something I've always been complimented on was that I show the adult experience with dyspraxia. And I'm kind of bittersweet about that whole distinction because, all in all, I don't think I've ever truly felt like an adult until relatively recently. And by recently, I mean within the past, 3, 4 years or so. So, when it came to deciding to make a video like this, where I actually touch on adulting in general, I always felt a little underqualified. Like, one of the biggest problems that my subscribers and commenters and even my fellow Redditors have always said to me is that they really appreciate that I show this adult side of dyspraxia, despite the fact that most of the resources out there on dyspraxia are essentially resources for parents of children with dyspraxia. And it's a very valid criticism to make. That's one of the unfortunate things about most of these neurodevelopmental disorders, be it autism, ADHD, or so on, is that, most of these resources are talking about children, and therefore parents and educators and even medical professionals. But once you become an adult, especially with a invisible illness, as these disorders are known as, it's not something that outwardly appears to affect one's day-to-day life, despite the fact that, as I've highlighted in almost every video in this channel, it absolutely does. But it does so in such a subtle way that most people aren't going to think, oh, hey, maybe this person needs help, or hey, maybe we should provide some resources for adults suffering with these disorders. And while I've been trying to hide it for a number of years, I am officially losing my hair, and I am pretty much about to be 30 very shortly. I don't want to expose my age too much, but yeah, I'm going to be 30 absurdly soon. So, I mean, I guess I am an adult, and I do have dyspraxia, so I guess you guys can consider me somewhat of an authority on the topic, but all I've really done is just my best in navigating the adult world with dyspraxia, and that's not necessarily a dyspraxia thing. Truly, I think one of the biggest realizations I've had as an adult, and something I've touched on in one of my more trippy existentialist videos, is that most people don't really know what they're doing when it comes to the world. When you're a kid, you kind of have somewhat of an illusion that the adults know what's going on, or that police know what's going on. But there's a common quote, and I forget who said it, but it basically goes along the lines of, anybody who tries to convince you that they know what's going on in the world is trying to sell you something. And becoming an adult, I think, is making that realization and actually connecting with it instead of just thinking of it as, oh, ha ha ha, a silly cliched quote. So, as in almost all of my videos where I touch on my life with dyspraxia, I can give you guys some idea of how I've navigated adulthood for the past 10, 15 years as a dyspraxic, and I can give you my point of view and how I've managed things, and if that helps you, like it seems to help all of my commenters, then so be it. But I can't promise that what works for me is going to work for everyone. And I have made a lot of decisions that may not have been the best decision. So your mileage may vary, Don't take anything I say in this video as law. This is more... Try to look at this as one of my more vlog type videos from my old days, where I just kind of talk about my life up to this point and how I've navigated it with dyspraxia, and less as general advice, because I don't want to be the reason someone goes down a shitty path that they probably shouldn't have been on. So, I guess with that long, brooding, somewhat depressing intro aside, let's talk about adulting with dyspraxia. So, let's start off by making one thing abundantly clear, and that's what exactly an adult is. Because part of the reason this video took me so long to make and is so hard to make is that defining adulthood is even hard. If you want to go by legal ruling or the age of consent or even the age that somebody can buy tobacco or alcohol or even the age that somebody can serve in the military, not only do these vary from country to country or even in the United States, state to state, but they also vary amongst the topics I listed. There are numerous examples of things that you can do when you're 21, but you can't do when you're 18, but then other things you can do when you're 18, but you can't do till you're 21. Like a good example is in the United States here, you can serve the military at the age of 18. You can vote at the age of 18, but you can't legally buy tobacco, alcohol, or even cannabis until the age of 21, although that last one also varies from state to state. One can also argue the classic scientific definition of adulthood, which would be around the age of 25, because around that time, scientifically, the human brain stops developing, so to speak. And so that's when you're pretty much considered an adult in sort of a mental, scientific viewpoint. I know I've said scientific a bunch of times, but that's basically the best way to look at it. Because even then, while you're 25, I've made a lot of stupid decisions between 25 and where I'm at now that even me younger probably wouldn't have made. And in theory, we are still learning new things every day. So it's not like you stop learning after 25, or that personality-wise or even wisdom-wise you stop developing after 25. It's just physically the brain does. And honestly, 25 is a little late if you think about it, because in most cultures, that 18 to 21 mark is when you're kind of forced into adulthood regardless of your brain development. That's when, in many cases, your parents aren't forced to take care of you. That's when you're usually forced into college, or not even forced, but you're kind of shoehorned into adulthood at that point. You have to start paying taxes, you have to get a job, you have more responsibilities, bills, etc., etc., etc. Honestly, I can't define adulthood because, as I said in this intro, it's not uncommon for most people to feel like they're not adults, even though they are. Some degree of an imposter syndrome, it's kind of like the whole idea of you really don't know what's going on in the world. And even when you reach a point of maturity where you truly do feel like an adult, it's less feeling like you're fully grown up and more aware of things, and more just accepting the earlier fact I mentioned, that you truly don't understand everything, but you accept that and you continue to navigate life in the best way you possibly can with a higher degree of maturity. And there is no specific age where that happens. I know some people who are in their early 20s, like 22, 23, who are more mature than I am now. And I know people in their 40s and 50s who are less mature than I am, or even some people in their early 20s. So when it comes to adulthood and maturity, I'm not going to pick a really hard to find age or anything. Let's just call adulthood as soon as you're out of high school and expected to have a job, responsibilities, pay taxes, and maintain some kind of domicile of your own, be it renting or even crashing in your parents' apartment but still being expected to maintain a job or some degree of income. And before we delve too deep into adulthood, if you're watching this video and you think you have dyspraxia, let me get this off my chest already. I know I bring it up in all of my older videos, but right off the bat, I need to get this off my chest. You do not have dyspraxia until you are diagnosed with dyspraxia. Let's put it that way. Dyspraxia is something that is incredibly subtle, but it's also a disorder, which means it has a bunch of things that are seen in pretty much everybody, but are taken to such an extreme that it makes it a disorder. So while many people can relate to dyspraxics to some degree, because everybody at some point has walked into a room and then forgot why they walked into that room, an individual with dyspraxia will have that constantly with nearly everything. And there's so much more that goes into it. Look at my whole channel detailing it. So I don't say that to denigrate or crap on anyone, because, I don't want to say definitely that you, dear viewer, who hasn't been diagnosed yet, doesn't have dyspraxia. But one of the most annoying things I've seen is either a YouTube video saying, oh, these are the X amount of signs that you have dyspraxia, or especially people going on Reddit saying, hey, I'm experiencing this, this, and this. Do I have dyspraxia? It may sound like you have dyspraxia, and even to most dyspraxics, they may be like, wow, yeah, that's a lot like what I go through. But we are not licensed medical professionals. Only a licensed medical professional with your specific history, as in your proper medical history, will be able to make that determination. And usually there's a bunch of diagnostic tests and so on. So it's pertinent that if you do think you have dyspraxia, you follow up with a physician, notably a specialist, that being a neurologist or a psychiatrist. So for all those people asking where they go to get diagnosed, I can only speak as someone who lives in the US, and I know in the UK there's some degree of equivalence, but 9 times out of 10 your primary care provider, or your GP, I guess they call them in the UK, isn't going to diagnose you with dyspraxia, but they can usually give you a referral to a specialist. In the United States, that would usually be someone along the lines of a neurologist, which is somebody who specializes in like cognitive senses and the brain and so on. And also a psychiatrist probably could, although here in the US, psychiatry is kind of hit or miss depending on your insurance and so on. So please get diagnosed before assuming you have dyspraxia, please, because it can be very harmful, and especially with the rise in influencers proclaiming they have a disorder and, becoming almost a caricature of it, it ends up leading to things that make those individuals with said disorders look bad, so to speak. This is something that's become a lot more prominent with tic disorders like Tourette's syndrome. There was a really big thing on TikTok for the longest time where you had people almost like with a placebo effect convincing themselves they had something when they didn't. So please, 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 if you do think that you have dyspraxia, go and get diagnosed by a licensed medical professional before making any assumptions, please. And with that out of the way, I am going to be making this video in somewhat of a very disorganized way. I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different topics at a time. So I'll put some timestamps below, and maybe I'll do the whole chapters feature. But talking about that last thing kind of got me irritated. So let's go outside, have a cigarette, and talk about some of the lesser decisions I've made as a dyspraxic and as an adult. Let's go. I do not condone smoking. I never will. It's one of my worst habits. It's something I actually quit smoking for about 8 months. And in that time, I wasn't making content, so I couldn't even really talk about it. I did bring it up in a stream once, I think. And lo and behold, I got this new job, and I was kind of pushed into smoking again. Smoking is something that I do not condone, and I would not suggest anybody start, whether you have dyspraxia or not. However, what both my comments on YouTube as well as fellow dyspraxics, both on Reddit, Twitter, and so on, have relayed to me is that it's not unheard of, and in fact is probably a lot more common that dyspraxics smoke cigarettes. Now, I have done a full video on tobacco with dyspraxia, being the consumption of both cigarettes and smokeless tobacco like dip, which I used to do primarily. And I've always had a couple of reasons for smoking, and most of them were related to my dyspraxia. Something I've mentioned even in my very first video, Living with Dyspraxia. I talked about how I don't know what to do with my hands. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of dyspraxics can relate to, as well as just people who aren't the best at public speaking. But because dyspraxia affects both hand-eye coordination and planning of movements, it's not like we have that level of control over our hands when we're focusing on whatever we're doing. That's why it makes it hard for us to walk in a straight line or do multiple things at once, essentially multitasking. And so I can't just put my hands in my pockets, especially coming from the military. But even before that, I was always told that keeping your hands in your pockets is unprofessional and you shouldn't do that. So what do I do with my hands, especially when I'm talking or walking or trying to focus on something else? I smoke. Another thing that others can relate to is smoking as a form of anxiety reduction. And as I've talked about in many of my videos, smoking doesn't actually reduce anxiety. However, it is forcing you to stop and take deep breaths and focus on taking deep breaths. In order to properly consume a cigarette, you actually have to properly inhale it, which means taking a deep breath. Just like that. And the thing is, when you have anxiety, one of the first things somebody tells you, whether you're having a panic attack or just general anxiety, is to take a deep breath. And they say that because it actually helps. And so when somebody consumes nicotine, especially, in a form of a cigarette, but even with vaping, essentially you're doing that. And on top of the taking yourself out of the moment and focusing on breathing, you're also getting injected with a healthy dose. Well, healthy is kind of an oxymoron there, an unhealthy dose of nicotine, which as you're getting that relief, you're also getting those reward chemicals, which are telling you, okay, this is your relief, so every time you're anxious, you smoke. And that is not a good thing to do. So I have to do a video of quitting smoking with dyspraxia, because when I quit smoking, the first month or two was pure freaking hell. I'm not gonna lie. I would say, regardless of dyspraxia, you can ask anybody. I've known hardened addicts who have done things like heroin and cocaine, who have said, oh, hey, yeah, quitting that was a lot easier than quitting smoking. Now, that is subjective from person to person, and every drug affects everybody differently, but the fact that that's not uncommon should be a sign that you probably shouldn't pick up smoking, and if you can avoid it at all possible, please do. But as a dyspraxic, I would say it definitely has some predisposition to somebody picking up smoking. Now, I can't give any advice on this because even after quitting for 8 months, which was surprisingly one of the best times of my life, believe it or not, it actually does reduce anxiety after you stop smoking for a long period of time because your brain stops associating that with, your anxiety. So you learn to manage it through that deep breathing and through managing it a lot easier without the nicotine. Thing is, once you're on it, it's very hard to stop. So the only advice I can give either a young adult dyspraxic watching this or some kid who stumbles upon this is just don't start smoking to begin with. Honestly, that's the only advice I can give, because otherwise, once you're on it, man. I'm sorry. And if I could give advice to quitting smoking, I'll do that in a separate video. So now I'm back here on my bed, and I am about to go to sleep. You may have noticed it was daytime as I was about to do that. So let me take my jacket off as I get ready for bed. Now you may be thinking, okay, I thought this was a video about adulthood. What does sleep have to do with it? Well, first, I will discuss sleeping with dyspraxia, and then I will discuss the importance of why I go to bed in the daytime and am active at night. Because becoming a night owl is probably one of the best things that has helped me cope with adulthood and manage adulthood as a dyspraxic. But before I get on that, I notice that a couple of dyspraxics have talked about, in Reddit mainly, about how dyspraxia affects the way they sleep. Now, I would argue that this is more tied to the large majority of dyspraxics who are also diagnosed with ADHD, as the hyperactive mind and the constant shifting of topics when you're just trying to focus on one thing can make it very hard to focus on sleeping. And as a dyspraxic, that's something that can also be hard for even people like me who only have a diagnosis of dyspraxia without any other comorbid, besides the anxiety, but I guess that affects sleep too. But ideally, the best way to manage sleep is to actually have a proper sleep schedule. And I know that is a lot easier said than done, but as I've gotten older, it's become a lot easier. Primarily what I do is I go to bed around 10 a.m. and wake up at 6 p.m. Now, this is going to take a while, and it's not going to be easy. It's just like the advice I gave you on quitting smoking. And like I said, this isn't an advice video. It's just a video on what's worked for me and how I've managed it. And yes, when I was younger, I would stay up until, the late hours and go to bed and just say, screw it. And the thing is, that is great when you're young. And it's a lot easier when you're young. But then as you get older, that affects your sleep in the long term. So it's better to start early and set a sleep schedule early. Now, it doesn't have to be 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., obviously. Because as I'll discuss when I'm talking about overnight with dyspraxia, living as a night owl isn't something that everybody can feasibly do, especially if you're a parent or aspiring to be a parent or are still in school or trying to go through school. So let me just get off that topic real quick and go back to the sleep schedule, which is the most important thing to maintain a regular sleep schedule. Now, if you do try going to bed at a time when you don't normally go to bed, you are going to just lay there with your eyes closed and just get frustrated because you can't fall asleep when you're used to being awake. However, there are two methods of dealing with that. The first thing to do is to just suck it up and just lay there until you fall asleep, which Again, a lot easier said than done, and gets really frustrating, but that's the best way to do it. The other method is to do what they did in the army, just force yourself to stay up for 24 hours, and by the time you choose to go to bed, you're not gonna fight it. You're just gonna freaking crash because you've been up so long that you're overtired, and you will sleep when you tell your body to sleep. Now, that may or may not be healthy. Obviously, ask your doctor before you choose to do something like that. But that's how I did it, and that's how I moved myself to the overnight life. Now, once you do have your sleep schedule set, stick to it. Literally stick to it. Because I've noticed that so long as I've kept a consistent 8-hour sleep schedule on a day-to-day basis, I've had minimized anxiety, I've had a lot more focus, and while my dyspraxia still remained, and it still affects my day-to-day life, as you can see even in my videos, it becomes a lot more manageable when I've had a solid 8 hours of sleep. So, I know that also isn't super easy with the work culture we have today. Many people have to work overtime and crazy hours to, afford to live anymore. And that's more of a societal issue and something that I can't even give advice on because, hell, that affects me sometimes. But if you can try to manage some degree of a sleep schedule, at least try to go to bed at the same time every night. That's all you gotta do. And even if you only sleep 6 hours, and then you have to wake up, it might shorten the amount of time you actually sleep for a little bit. But as long as you're going to bed at the same time every night, your body will catch up and it'll adjust. And after a while, if say you choose to go to bed at say 10 p.m. instead of 10 a.m., and you start doing that regularly, you just regularly lay down, even if you don't go to sleep right away, but you just regularly turn off the lights and lay down at 10 p.m. and do that every single night for about a week or two. After that period of time, you'll start getting tired at 10 p.m. Even if you try to stay up, you will get tired at 10 p.m. because your body becomes used to that sleep schedule. And that's something where, regardless of if it's sleep or something else, is what is your biggest superpower, not only as a dyspraxic, but as a human being in general, is that your body will get used to something if you do it consistently. And that's something I'm going to mention when I talk about hygiene with dyspraxia a little later too. Consistency is key, not just as a dyspraxia, but as an adult and as a functioning human being. And that's part of how I quit smoking too, was, what gets you on smoking is consistently smoking at the same time or with the same trigger. And that's not just with smoking, that's with anything you do. So, once you build these habits, and it's not just, sleeping or smoking, but any habit you want to do or want to start getting done, you start doing it consistently until it becomes second nature. And your body will automatically adjust and start doing it naturally. And especially with dyspraxia, where there seems to be some disconnection between your brain and your body, training your body is going to make it a lot easier for your mind to follow suit, and so on. So, it's actually about 15 minutes until my bedtime, so I am going to grab my blanket, I'm going to grab my stuffed animal, and this is important, even if you are an adult, don't ever feel the stigma of having certain comforts, because there's nothing wrong with having stuffed animals. Okay? Anyway, I'm going to go to bed, and I will pick up this video and see you guys in about 8 hours from now. So honestly, from what I've heard from just about everybody, waking up isn't an easy thing to do to begin with. Obviously with dyspraxia, there is a lot more resistance to waking up
And in my experience from both sleeping with and alongside other people, it takes significantly longer for us to fully wake up and integrate into the world upon waking up. I think the best way to think of it is think of your computer starting up, and especially with an older computer or a computer from previous generation, like say Windows 95 or even up to Windows XP, how it takes your computer so long to start up. First you have to get through the menu screens, and you gotta hit the password thingy, and then you gotta wait for all your startup programs to go through. Essentially, that's what it's like for a dyspraxic to wake up. It just takes so much longer, at least in my experience. And then once I'm up, actually getting myself to get out of bed, and I mean, this is something most people can relate to be honest, especially on a work day. Most people, you have to fight to get out of bed. But with dyspraxia, it's not like sleep paralysis necessarily, but it's just kind of the inability to push myself to get out of bed. So what I find myself having to do, as I've mentioned that scheduling your sleep schedule earlier, is actually setting yourself an hour or two at least. I specifically set 2 hours before I have to be out of the house to make sure that I'm awake. So that way I have plenty of time to actually get up and physically get out of bed, because I will lay here for a good 30 minutes, up to like 45 sometimes, just to fully wake up and adjust to the reality around me. And I do apologize if this part is really rambly. I literally just woke up, but I thought it would be cinematic and cool for the video. Also, one other thing I feel like I should mention here is if you wake up cold, that's actually not unheard of, and that's not even necessarily a dyspraxia thing. You see, when you're asleep, around when you hit REM sleep is when your body temperature drops down to its coldest, at least your core temperature. So if, say, you are having difficulty with maintaining your electric bill because it's so freaking expensive, or not even that, even if you do have, I'd say, room temperature, temps, and you don't have your heat on all the way like I used to when the electric bill and the heating bill wasn't so bad. It is very likely that due to our sensitivity to feel and touch temperature, that you will wake up feeling really freaking cold. And that'll also contribute to making it a lot harder to get out of bed. So ideally, when you're setting your sleep schedule, you need to make sure that you allocate the time for when you wake up. And I feel like it'll be a lot easier to set a time to go to sleep, because even if you just get home, I know it's a lot harder to sleep when you just get home from work, but even then it'll be a lot easier to fall asleep after just getting home than to wake up right before work or right before anything you need to do. So okay. As I've mentioned a couple of times in my videos, dyspraxia comes with a bunch of comorbid disorders,
depending on the person, obviously, but usually there's a whole bunch of them. ADHD is one of the more common ones. However, luckily, I don't have that. What I do have is gastroesophageal reflux disease. And that's the thing, is when it comes to stomach issues, they're actually really common in individuals who do have neurodevelopmental and or mental health disorders, especially irritable bowel syndrome is one of them. Yeah, luckily, my irritable bowel isn't, notable, consistent, or bad enough for me to take medication for it. However, my gastroesophageal reflux disease is, and that leads to daily medication. And when you have dyspraxia, one of the hardest things is taking your medication on a regular basis, as you should. Like, for instance, this is pantoprazole, otherwise known by the brand name Protonix. It is a proton pump inhibitor. So what it does is it basically causes the stomach to produce less stomach acid, which is a lifesaver when you have chronic acid reflux like I do. So, for one thing, try to keep that consistency like I mentioned earlier. You can set an alarm for when to take your medications. Luckily, it's not something I have to worry about, and something that may help you even is to just take it when you wake up or take it before you go to bed. However you best choose to do it. It is ingrained in me now that I take my medication essentially right when I wake up. As soon as I wake up, first thing I do is take that medication before anything else, especially because I am going to be doubled over in pain if I don't take it. And it's one of the few things where if I forget to do it in the morning, I realize it. Like, I'm going to feel it even like a couple minutes later. Like, as you guys, I don't know if you guys can tell, my throat is all fucked up. Because, yeah, so I'm going to do this. Just one more thing I should mention is that with dyspraxia, it's very hard to swallow pills over a certain size, because, swallowing. And I honestly, I know dyspraxics can relate to a lot of these things where it's just kind of like things that most people take for granted. But I know a lot of people who have trouble with pills, even people who don't have dyspraxia. So I would assume most dyspraxics have trouble with taking pills. Personally, what I do is I use a method of drinking something first and then throwing the pill in and then swallowing the pill with the drink. But everybody kind of has a different way of doing it, so I don't even know why I brought it up. And it's important to always have something to drink alongside you. And, yeah. Where you keep your medication, obviously, they have pill sorters and all that stuff. Personally, I mean, as soon as I wake up, I come and sit here in my Papazon chair, turn on my heater because I'm cold as hell when I wake up. So I will usually keep my medications right here next to me in the Papazon chair for the most part. I know it's not the most organized thing, but that way I know where they are when I wake up. And I don't do that with most things, but with something as vital as medication, I'd rather know where it is than worry about it being in a super organized place. Now, I did mention that I was going to talk about why I'm active at night, and I'm also going to discuss hygiene with dyspraxia here in this video. And even though I just woke up, the first thing I'm going to do is have a cigarette. Now, the reason I'm even recording this part is to highlight two specific things. First off, that yes, smoking is a habit that is super easy to integrate. It's one of the first things I do when I wake up. So don't start, because you could end up just like me, where as soon as you wake up and take your meds, you're going to smoke. And the second reason is also to highlight the consistency thing. Because again, I do this on a schedule pretty much every day. I wake up, I take my pill, I smoke, then I do my hygiene things, my toothbrushing, my freaking showering, etc., etc., etc. Now, my family's still awake, and one or two of them is probably outside smoking right now. So unfortunately, I can't take you guys with me like I usually do for my smokes. So I will be right back after the cigarette. I will talk about hygiene with dyspraxia. Now, one thing that I'm very frequently asked, surprisingly, by my commenters is, how do I maintain my hygiene and keep myself clean? And a lot of this does fall into the same category of just setting yourself up a proper routine. Now, this may sound a little odd to most people who don't have dyspraxia, but when very simple tasks require so much effort as it does for the typical dyspraxic, things like hygiene tend to fall to the wayside. Now, I'll admit, I've never necessarily had a problem with things like showering, and I actually quite like showering, especially because I wake up cold in the morning. So it is my first instinct to want to hop in a hot shower. And I'm actually quite comfortable in a hot shower. So I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I have no problem showering on a regular basis. But there are some important things to take into account when it comes to showering. But before I shower, before I talk about showering, let's discuss something that I'll admit I've even had some troubles over the years with, and that's brushing my teeth. As you can see, they're pretty stained still, even amongst me, finally starting to brush my teeth about a year or so ago. Yeah, it's taken me that long to really get down to a routine of brushing my teeth. And I think part of that is just because if you do brush your teeth relatively infrequently, what's going to happen is you will get gum puffiness and gum disease. Like, you can see my gums are all inflamed and everything, even now. Not as bad as they used to be. But luckily, I've never had cavities, but even in the absence of cavities, gum disease is nothing to laugh at. After all, I've got some gum recession down here and so on, and honestly, it's best to nip it in the bud early and try to get your toothbrushing game on early. Now, the thing is, brushing your teeth is time-consuming, and especially with dyspraxia, it can make your hand cramp up. It's hard to hit all the rough spots, and this is where the sonic brush comes in. This is not a sponsored video, not in the slightest, but I've seen ads for this pretty much everywhere, and since I've gotten it, it's completely changed my game as a dyspraxic adult. Honestly, it's super easy. You get a couple of these things, they're kind of rubbery and everything. You stick your toothpaste in 4 different parts. You don't even need to put water on it because your mouth will salivate. And how these things work is they use vibrations to basically stimulate as if it's brushing your teeth for you. And it'll stop when you're clean enough. So I'm just going to show you guys real quick. You just... just like that, stops when it's done. You see there's a little bit of bleeding on there. That's what happens when your gums have been puffy for so long. And after you do it for a while, obviously you clean it out, or you can get replacement parts, which is what I do. I just get a regular order of replacement parts, so that way I don't have to reuse the same one over and over again. And just like that. And
It's good to actually like rinse out your mouth afterwards, especially if you got a lot of blood in there like I do. But that's the thing. And the thing is, if you haven't brushed your teeth for a while, you still will have some staining here and there. Even if you thoroughly brush, that'll go away after a couple of months. Some stains just kind of stick for years, unfortunately. But as long as you keep it consistent, brush your teeth around the same time every day. And like I said, that sonic brush, man, super quick, super easy. You could even do it. You don't even have to go to the bathroom to do it. I just figure I have a couple of things I got to do in the bathroom right now. So I just keep it in there. And simple as that. Now, typically when it comes to hygiene, you consider health and beauty in around the same place. Things like makeup, doing one's hair, so on. Now, personally, I can't weigh on this at all. When I wanted to do a dedicated video on hygiene or health and beauty with dyspraxia, I found it difficult because beauty in general is subjective. Now, obviously, hygiene is important, and showering and brushing your teeth are something that everybody should do. But when it comes to beauty standards and how you choose to make yourself look and how you dedicate your appearance beyond that, entirely subjective. It all comes down to your comfort. Now, as I said, I'm balding, and honestly, shaving is a pain in the ass. It always has been for me. So instead of shaving and shaping up and shit, usually what I do is I take the edge of where my mustache and my goatee are, take some clippers, go right up and down, clean up all in here. And obviously, when my balding starts to show, I'll shave my entire head. That's a video for another time, though, because I am definitely not in the mood to shave tonight. However, again, it's subjective. It really doesn't matter. So, yeah, and the other part is, I mean, I'm a male, and according to YouTube's analytics, about 80% of my subscribers are male, but 20% are female. And the thing is, I don't think females really have to worry about the whole facial grooming and everything. Trans rights and all that, I'm sure there are some that do. But the vast majority of females, have even more stringent beauty standards and all this other crap. So honestly, I just wouldn't stress the beauty thing. Just go with what's comfortable for you and what's easy for you. And for all those females out there who are worried about makeup and shit, I actually went through somewhat of a goth emo phase in high school. I can tell you that eyeliner is probably the biggest pain in the ass when it comes to dyspraxia. And I hate having things near my eyes. So I don't blame y'all for not wanting to wear makeup, and I don't expect any female to. Almost every girl I've been with hasn't worn makeup on a regular basis unless they really enjoyed it. So, at least from my perspective, I don't find anyone more or less attractive with or without makeup. But to each is their own, I guess. Honestly, if you have dyspraxia, don't stress the makeup thing. Just try to maintain your hygiene, showering, and brushing your teeth. Now, another important thing is when it comes to showering, a whole temperature thing. Because like I've said in numerous videos, temperature is important. And we are typically sensitive to certain temperatures. I, for one, am always super sensitive to cold. Heat, not so much. In fact, in many cases in the past, what had happened was I would hop in the shower and I would have it super mega hot and not even realize that I'm burning myself until last minute. So typically what I'll do, and I am about to hop in the shower, but I'm not trying to get naked on YouTube. So I'll show you guys. What I'll do is I like these single nozzles here. I can't speak for the two nozzle setup, but I mean, I feel like most showers have the single nozzle, and that's the other thing that sucks is when you have showers, they're always different from person to person. But ideally what you should do is you should start out cold. Make sure it's cold, and then slowly ease your way up. Now, you could just hop in there, start with a cold shower, and ease up while you're in there. Personally, I don't like cold showers. I know in an earlier video I said just settle with a cold shower and then warm it up as you're in there. But I found a different method of handling it. See, when I found out I had a daughter, I learned a bunch of things about parenting. And one of them is how to test a bottle before you give it to a child, to make sure it's warm enough without being too hot to burn. And that is to use the bottom of your wrist there. So, when you start the shower, don't use your hand to feel the water. Use the back of your wrist to feel the water. And that'll tell you whether it's too hot or not before you hop in the shower. Everything from there should be relatively simple. Now, the thing about shaving one's head, and part of the reason why I haven't done that, is shaving your head is a whole different video entirely that I'm definitely going to have to do later on, because there's so much depth to it. Primarily, if you could have somebody do it for you, if you have a roommate or a girlfriend or so on, and you can have them do it for you, it's probably best to do it that way. Because, shaving, especially the back of your head, is like mowing your lawn blindfolded. It is the hardest thing ever. Personally, I've gotten pretty good at doing it, and I'm definitely going to have to soon, especially with how apparent it's getting as my hair's growing back. My hair always grows back super quick, but that's another video for another time. Now, one of the most important questions that tends to come around in men's circles is boxers or briefs, and my answer is boxer briefs. There's pros and cons to both. The thing is, with briefs, you get a lot more support. And honestly, as a dyspraxic, because we're all affected differently in terms of feeling and comfort and everything, and this goes the same for ladies as well, what you choose for your underwear doesn't really matter, because most people aren't going to see it anyway. So go with what's comfortable. Personally, I know briefs are relatively important for maintaining like sperm count and all this other stuff, but boxers just feel looser and they're less constricting, and I've always found it more comfortable to wear boxers as opposed to briefs, even though there tends to be more medical benefits to briefs comfort wise. I'm just more of a boxers guy. If things are too constricting, like I even wear pants sizes that are about a size or two too big, and I just wear a belt with it, just because like tight clothing is just really constricting and incredibly uncomfortable. And I don't know if that's a dyspraxia thing or just me personally, but I notice most dyspraxics, there's that sensitivity with temperature, and that kind of constriction is something that is incredibly uncomfortable for me as well. So I've got these, and they're kind of like briefs in that they're, plain colored and they hug a little tighter, but they're still like loose briefs. So what most people call these is boxer briefs, but that's what I choose to wear. So when it comes to getting dressed for the day, ideally comfort is king, honestly. And when it comes to fashion and all of that is entirely subjective. The only real thing I would recommend advice-wise is black. Black pants, primarily. Because you can wear anything with black and it'll look good, especially black pants. So, obviously if you have a work uniform, you gotta adhere to the work uniform. Although, again, if you're like me, I would recommend getting or requesting one size bigger than what you'll need. With a shirt, you can wear a bigger shirt, and as long as it's not like 2 or 3 sizes too big, it's not gonna look super baggy in you. But obviously if it's too tight, it'll feel constricting, and that can create anxiety and panic and so on. So looser is better, at least for me, and your mileage may vary because some dyspraxics are more sensitive to other things as opposed to the tightness of one's clothes, but that's how I've managed. One other thing I will recommend is pajama pants. Pajama pants are the greatest thing ever, especially the real fuzzy, comfortable ones. I absolutely love the feel of pajama pants.
And as long as you are getting your pants one size too big at least, you can wear like formal or proper pants over pajama pants. And I've found that that gives me maximum comfort because I'll have the texture of the pajama pants, but on the outside it'll still look pretty good. And the thing is, I mean, I get somewhat of a military discount when I order at military surplus stores. So if you get, like, say, military fatigues, typically they only come in size small, medium, and large. So it's guaranteed you're going to get something baggy anyway that'll fit right over pajama pants. So that's the best way to do it, honestly. And especially with cargo pants or combat pants, especially if they're black, the best thing about cargo pants, especially black cargo pants, is they can be worn both casually. They can also be worn formally. You can throw on a button up and then tuck it into black cargo pants, and they'll look just like dress pants. So really, utility is your best friend when it comes to choosing what to wear. And on top of that, with cargo pants, you have a bunch of pockets, so you don't ever have to worry about losing anything. So that's one of the biggest benefits, and something that I would heavily recommend for all dyspraxics is pajama pants, and then cargo pants or military fatigues when it comes to your pants. Upper-wise, that kind of varies from person to person. I know some dyspraxics, they just can't do turtlenecks because it's too constricting and it feels like you're choking, which I relate to some degree. I can't wear like turtleneck shirts because of that, but like something like this, where it's a sweater, and because it's thick and loose, I can wear this all the way up and it's not going to stress me out as much, and I can unzip it down a little bit if it is and turn it into a collar if I wanted to. But it really all depends on personal preference. And again, as for fashion, I mean, a t-shirt and pants has always been fashion for the longest time. So as long as you're wearing a t-shirt and pants, you'll be fine no matter where you go. So now on to the big topic, and probably the most pertinent one to my lifestyle, and that is the fact that it is really late right now. It's actually dark right now, and typically that is because I work overnight shifts. But not only do I work overnight shifts, as clearly I'm off, otherwise I wouldn't be recording such a long video, I live overnight. I sleep during the day and I'm active at night. And that has become one of the biggest things that has helped my dyspraxia over the years. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So let's start by talking about work life and overnights. See, one of the greatest things about being an overnight worker is, for one, the job security, but also typically on overnight shifts, there's a lot less business, so to speak. Whether it's in a retail job and everybody's pretty much asleep, or nobody's really out, so you have more time and more free space to do things, or even if you're in a warehouse or you do security like I do now, you tend to have a lot more free time, a lot more area to move around in, and just a lot more breathing room. So when it comes to getting tasks done, you're able to make a list and strategically place, breaks in between that list of your tasks and everything. And you have plenty of time where you're not going to be ridiculously busy while maintaining your schedule and giving you plenty of time to get a task done. Because typically many dyspraxics, due to the amount of effort it takes us to even do simple tasks, let alone most work tasks, we need more time to get things done. And that's where the job security comes in too. For one thing, at least in most workplaces I've worked in, while one of the strengths of being a dyspraxic worker is we tend to find alternate methods of doing things, in many cases these things are more efficient, we do tend to do most things slower than others. So having that job security is nice, especially when layoffs come around, because the last person they're going to lay off is one of the handful of people who's willing to work overnights. Now, I'm not saying that to imply that you can just slack off and not do your job. Obviously, do your job, because every job has a right to fire you if you are not doing the job as you're expected to. However, overnight does allow for a lot more freedom of movement usually, as the average person isn't really out. And even in a security job, they tend to hire less people to work overnights. So whether you're doing security or even if you're working in a warehouse, there's a lot less pressure mounting on you and on your back to ensure that everything gets done fast, and you usually don't have as much stuff on your plate, so to speak. And another thing that'll easily transition from work life to personal life is, as you can see, it's dark in here for the most part. You can barely see me. Now, I'm making sure you can see some of me because I don't want this video to be super low quality. But for the most part, it is dark out. And as you guys know, part of the reason why I wear these sunglasses pretty much all the time is because when you have dyspraxia, you tend to be prone to sensory overload. And that's doubly the case for those dyspraxics who also have a comorbidity with something like ADHD or autism, which also have their fair share of sensory processing issues. So when it's dark out and there's not as many people outside, and typically it's quieter out because there's a lot less traffic at night, there's a lot less businesses open, so a lot less light at night, it tends to be a lot more relaxed and a lot less stimulating being active at night. And that includes both your work life when you're at work as well as when you're going to and coming home from work, but also when you're home. You know, if you're off, sometimes you want to go outside. Sometimes you want to take a long walk. Sometimes you want to just relax in your backyard and enjoy nature. And it's so much easier when you don't have a big sun glaring on you, or you don't hear a bunch of cars on the highway or on the roads near you. You know, so ideally, overnight is probably the best, both from a work-life perspective and a personal life perspective. Now, the other thing is, and this is both a blessing and a curse, it can be just as damning as it is a blessing, and that is the social life, which already, as I've discussed in a previous video, dyspraxia can easily affect one's social life. You throw in the whole overnight aspect, and yeah, no, that social life is pretty much gone. So when it comes to living overnight, it's best to have some degree of a social circle of other individuals who either work overnights or stay up late, basically. However, for the most part, it is also a blessing because people just leave you alone. And that's not just on the personal side, but on the work side. Almost every job I've worked at, I was pretty much the last person to be asked to cover extra shifts. I was the last person to be bothered by, something going on at work, simply because no one's going to bother you if they know you're sleeping when everybody else is awake. And it's the same for the personal life. And not much is expected of you. And that goes doubly for maintaining your household, whether you live with roommates or your parents, or even if you're living alone. There's a lot less onus to do chores or bring in groceries or be asked to do these things when you're asleep. Most people aren't going to wake you up to do these things. However, again, that's just as damning because you still, whether you're living alone or even if you're living with roommates and still have your own room, living in a messy room is quite uncomfortable after a while, and it is very distracting. And my fellow ADHD people, I'm sure you guys have seen all your TikToks and your shorts and everything. I know you guys, you have your ways of cleaning, and us just with dyspraxia have our ways of cleaning. However, without somebody kind of pushing a dyspraxic to clean, messes tend to pile up a little bit. So that's really the only main negative when it comes to the personal life with dyspraxia and overnight. And the other thing to keep in mind is I would not suggest overnight to somebody who is a parent or if you have any major responsibilities. For instance, most court places, whether you're going to court regularly for child support or what have you, don't open until around 9 or 10 in the morning. The same goes for if you have a medical issue, which many of us dyspraxics do, be it related to the hypochondriac aspect of it, or if you have the irritable bowel or so on. Most doctors don't open until around like 9 or 10 a.m. too. And even then, they reserve those early spots for people who are elderly. So therefore, you're lucky to even get in that early. So, that's why I like kind of the 10 to 6 sleep schedule, because luckily with my doctor, I'm able to get super early appointments. So I can get in, do whatever I need to do at the doctor's, and come home. Same with picking up my prescriptions. The pharmacy usually opens around 8 or 9. So I can usually go out, pick up my prescription, come home, and still have at least, 45 minutes before I have to go to sleep. And the same should go with your work life too. While I say 10 to 6, that may not work for everyone's work schedule. What constitutes as an overnight or graveyard shift is different from profession to profession and from company to company. So for me, because I work 12-hour shifts, it's 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So the 10 to 6 means I have like 2 hours after I leave work and 2 hours before I go to work to just do what I need to do, relax, get comfortable, or get prepared for the day, and then go to work. If, say, you work 8-hour shifts and you work, say, a 10 to 6, obviously you can't wake up at 10. You would need to adjust your sleep schedule accordingly. However, if you do choose to work overnights, that is, it's a benefit, but the thing is you have to do it early. You have to start that at a younger age, because as you get older, it becomes a lot harder to change your sleep schedule. And that's something I've noticed as I've gotten older, and I'm not even 30 yet. I'm about there, but I'm not there yet. And it's already getting harder. Like when I was moving to days for a short period of time to do my training and everything, it took me like a week or two just to readjust to the daytime. And then to go back to overnight, it took me like almost a month to get back onto an overnight sleep schedule. So it's better to set your schedule early and maintain that consistency. And it's like I said earlier in this video, consistency is key for everything in adulthood. You have to maintain that consistency in order to build these things, not only as things you do on a regular basis, but as habits. Everything needs to be a habit when you have dyspraxia. Otherwise, there's no onus to do it. There's a lot of what's known as apathy when it comes to dyspraxia, and that's related to a couple of things. Primarily, the depression that tends to be comorbid with dyspraxia, but also, the fact that it requires us so much effort to do things without it being something that comes automatically. So because it takes that extra effort, actually doing something that you don't do on a regular basis becomes so much harder when you have dyspraxia. So you have to start early, and you have to push yourself to do it every day at around the same time every day until it becomes a habit. Once it becomes a habit, it becomes a lot easier to do and maintain when you have dyspraxia, because it just happens naturally. And that's, I guess, the synopsis. That's basically the whole point of this video at the end of the day, is if you are going to be an adult with dyspraxia, it's best to start these things early. Anything you want to get done, you need to do it early, like at a younger age. Or, you can do it now. There are things that I have started to improve and have started doing recently that have become, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort. And it's best to do that when you're younger. And this is something that everybody tells us as kids, and everybody tells us as young adults. And the thing is, when you're a young adult, you feel invincible. You feel like you can do everything. Even when you have dyspraxia, while there is some limitation, you still have kind of that just, I am young, I'm in charge of the world, And I can tell you firsthand, especially if you start doing crazy stuff, like the stuff I used to do on stage and everything, you'll notice that by the time you're 30, you're going to start feeling shit. And especially if you don't start working out and everything. And working out is a big thing that I'll have to do a whole video on, working out with dyspraxia. And I guess that's the thing at the end of the day. And I guess that's the whole point of this video, really. And one of the biggest struggles I've had in life when becoming an adult with dyspraxia. And as I've matured, I've come to these realizations and I've started to nail a lot of these things down. So, I mean, you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, and life always throws curveballs at you. So, I get it. Consistency isn't something you can always maintain, and there's always going to be something that changes in your life. And you got to adapt to it, obviously. But for the most part, if you can build habits, that's the key to adulting with dyspraxia. And honestly, there is so much more I could have said in this video, honestly. And I'm sure I'm saving a lot for future videos because I do want to start making videos again, especially because streaming seemed to have bumped up my numbers a lot. Looking at my analytics, like I'm at 300 subs now, which is incredible. I just, over the past year, I got 100 subs and I haven't even been making videos. And I kind of feel bad about that. So I figured I'd make this sort of longer, more in-depth video than my usual ones, and that's what this is. And I appreciate every single one of you guys for following my content and supporting me and everything. You guys are all awesome, and I really hope this video did help somebody. I mean, this is one of my more ranting, this is my life kind of videos. And there are some videos I do plan on doing in the future. To keep an eye out for. Obviously, I want to do the one on shaving my head. Probably the next time I shave my head, I'll have to make a video out of it. There's also cooking, which is an adult thing with dyspraxia that I really want to discuss. And that's definitely something for another video later on. And if you guys have any ideas for videos you want to see me do, leave them in the comments. And I'll definitely do it. But part of the reason I made this video too was a lot of people have been asking about things like hygiene with dyspraxia, and I really wanted to do a video on living overnight with dyspraxia, but they were seemingly such simple things that, it wasn't worth doing a whole video on, honestly, especially now that I'm finally coming back and I have a cord that I can transfer my videos on through so I can actually upload them and everything. So, now that I have that, I wanted to make something grandiose, and I figured all these topics that I couldn't fit just into one whole video, I would compress into a general adulting with dyspraxia video. So, that's the onus of this, and I appreciate you guys for watching it, making it this far in the video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and you guys have a good one.